Today I'm doing the quality adjusted life year problem in Kattis, and this one reads, the quality of life lived can be quantified as a number between 0 and 1. If someone is living with perfect health, the quality of life is 1, and if they're dead, then the quality of life is 0. The quality of life may increase or decrease due to medical treatments, sickness, etc. So in this problem, we're going to be given 3 numbers: N, which is the number of periods of constant quality of life during the person's lifetime, and then N lines following that giving Q, which is the quality of life in the period, and Y, which is the number of years in that period. And then the output will display the quality adjusted life year accumulated by the person. So we're going to start out with N equals integer type input, and our other 2 numbers are going to have decimals, so those aren't going to be integers. Let me scroll down to the sample input, so you can see each of those have 1 decimal point. So those will need to be floats, which is a different type of data, different data type. Okay, so in Python, I'm going to work this by first declaring my counter, or setting the counter at 0, and then using a while loop. So while I, the counter variable, is less than n, which is the input number, however many lines of code or lines of input we're going to be given, we're going to go through this while loop. So if I is 0 and that's less than 5 lines of input, then the first time through we're going to go line equals input, and it will accept both numbers because each of those 5 lines now has 2 numbers: Q, the quality of life, and Y, the number of years. So we'll use the line split number. I'm changing those from A and B to Q and Y so it matches the problem. And then we can define what data type we want to save those in. So it'll input them as read them in as a string, and then we can make them into an integer, float, or other data type. So for Python, float makes the most sense. Here's all the other specific data types. It's called float because there's a floating decimal. If you want to learn more specifics, then you can look that up. Okay, so Q is going to be a float because it has 1 decimal place, and so does Y. And now that I've read both of those in, I need a total. So basically the quality of life of the person is going to be each segment of their life, the quality times the number of years with that quality, plus the next segment of their life, the quality, the Q value times the years, and that will just continue each time we loop through. So I just added a total equals 0 at the top there before we enter the while loop, and then as it loops through, total plus equals means that plus equals operator just basically means total equals total plus some change. So it's taking the old total and adding some value. So it's going to add Q times Y. And then lastly, at the end of this while loop, I need to increment the I. So I plus equals 1, meaning after the first loop, it goes from 0 to 1, and so on until I is no longer less than n. Using our sample input, that would mean it loops through the last value of I would be 4. Okay, so let's do a test here. I'm just going to paste in this sample input so I don't have to type all of it. And we get 41.47. So that is the right answer. Sample output. Your answer will be considered correct if its absolute error does not exceed 10 to the negative 3. So that is correct, and I could submit that, but I'm not doing these just for my health. I'm doing this as an exercise to become good at the minutia of programming. So let's go ahead and look up how to format the 3 decimal places. Alright, so under Python parameter values for number formatting, we use the lowercase f and then just use the format reserved word, and after the thing we're printing, which is the total or the value assigned to the total variable, I'm just going to put quotation marks 0.3 to indicate I want 3 decimal places, and then the lowercase f, which is the reserved character using the formatting word. So let's run this again using the same sample input, and now you can see I have 3 decimal places, 41.470. We didn't need to do that, but it's an opportunity to learn something new, practice something I haven't shown before. Alright, so next I'm going to do the same problem in C++. Alright, so once I get my new VS Code window open, I'm just opening a separate window so I can use my Python logic as kind of a guide, and we're going to code this in C++. So as always, we'll start out with hashtag include IOStream using namespace standard. And int main, for my main method, return 0. So that's just the basic stuff that we know we're going to need. Inside int main method, I'm going to start out with well, we know I have to read in my number of lines, so let's go ahead and put a C in. CNN, which is the first number of the user input, and that means I need to define what type of data it is before then. So remember, we're not making integers of Q, Y, and total because those have decimal places. So those will again be floats. In C++, we could also make them doubles, another data type, but because the problem states that we're only going to have basically 3 decimal places, we don't need as much memory as a double would give us. It's like twice, I think a float is like 4 bytes and a double is 8 bytes or something. So if you need to carry the numbers after the decimal place through more calculations without having a rounding error and propagating that error, then you'd want to use a double. But this is very simple, so a float will do just fine. So then we're going to read in the number of lines and then create our... Well, actually, I'm not going to use a while loop here. I'm going to use a for loop. First setting the counter to 0. And I did add that the counter variable to the declare variables under integer type above. And now we're going to read in the next lines. So I started typing while because that's what I did in Python, but I mean, you could do that. I was just taught to generally avoid while loops if you are at all able to, because they tend to be more problematic and you can get into like an infinite loop basically. I mean, there's also ways around that too. You can put in breaks, but you just kind of have to be more careful of it than you do with a for loop. So yeah, basically I would just try to use while loops very intentionally and deliberately if I couldn't use a for loop or conditional statements like if else. So I'm just looking up the syntax for a for loop. And the reason I didn't do a for loop in Python was because, well, I mean, you can look up the documentation for Python for how you use a for loop, but it's better for things in a list or like yeah, I'll explain that another time. So reading the lines, I'm gonna have 3 statements in my first inside the parentheses for the for statement. So the first statement is executed one time before execution of the code block. The second statement defines the condition for executing the code block, and the third statement is after the code block has been executed, so your incrementer. So the first one is setting the counter to 0. The second one is your constraint, saying do this as long as I is less than n. And then third, I++ means add 1 at the end of each loop. So we're going to read in each line, cn, q, and then y, and then add to the total. Oh, and then I haven't declared, or I didn't set total equal to 0 above before the for loop. So let's do that here. So this would be fine enough, but again, I'm trying to use the opportunity to learn how to do as many things as I can. So I'm gonna do the same thing where I set the precision to 3 decimal places, and I just looked up how to do that in Stack Overflow, another great resource for learning. And I'm gonna try the cout fixed set precision 3 because I want 3 decimal places, or stated differently, 3 numbers after the decimal point. And it looks like I need to include IO manip. So I'm adding another line at the beginning. Alright, so that looks good now. So we're saying when I print out the total, I want to print it using set precision. So I'm going to run the build task with G++. Once I see the executable, I will do a test run. So let's go back and copy the sample input and paste it in there. The paste in your terminal, by the way, is just a right click. It's not a Control V or any other shortcuts, hotkeys you use. Alright, so I'm getting a weird number here, 286.040. The 3 decimal places worked, which is good news, but the value itself is wrong, so there's something wrong with my logic. So let's go back up to the for loop and see where I went wrong. I didn't figure it out at first glance, so another thing you can do is just add a print line wherever you aren't sure what's happening. So by adding a cout total within the for loop, that's going to make a printed total after every input. And then I did end up realizing the error with the total plus equals total plus q times y. That was adding doubly every line. So that's why I was getting such a large result, and that's corrected. And I also rebuilt the executable with the new changes. So here I'm going to do a test run. Paste the sample input again. Okay, so when I did a cout total, I didn't include a new line after each one, so they're all kind of squished together there. But we are getting the right answer. So I'm just going to remove that troubleshooting print line I added. And this should be good. So let's do one more test. This is kind of a pain with C++. You have to build it every time you want to run it or make a change. Okay, looks good. So now it's running perfectly. Let's go ahead and copy this and paste it into the Kattis coding area. And submit. And finally, we're going to do the same problem in Java. So change the programming language and then hop over, create a new file for Java in Visual Studio Code. Public class QALY, QALY, and then public static void main. I think I've finally got it down by memory after doing this like 5 times in a row. Most people need to see something like up to 7 times before you actually understand it or remember it. So don't feel bad if you're just starting. I am definitely not a Java expert. Alright, and then my brackets. And then at the top, I want to add my import java.util.scanner since I'm reading in user input. Importing the scanner class. And then inside my main method, I can create a scanner object. So I've got to name my object first. I'm going to name it N, and that should be an equal sign. And then I'm defining integer N equals n.nextInt, which is the built-in method. If I sometimes misspeak and say function when it's supposed to be method or something like that, I'm still learning, and what I mean is like the thing that does something, but all these languages have their idiosyncrasies, and they call things differently based on the programming. So I think nextInt is the built-in method of the scanner class. And then I'm going to enter my for loop. So for I equals 0, which just initializes the counter variable. And I never actually defined that variable, so I need to go up above the for loop and just make sure I add I as an integer. So let me just create a section for declare variables. and make I an integer. And since I'm here, I'll go ahead and declare the floats Q, Y, and total. Well, I'll make total on its own line just because I can declare the data type as well as assigning a value, an initial value, in the same line. Alright, so now I need brackets after the conditions of the for loop. And then what each loop is going to do is read in the data. So it's going to use the in object, the scanner object. So first we need to type what the variable is, and then what is assigned to it. So Q is going to use the next float method because Q is a float data type, and the same for Y. And then I can add to my total Q times Y. And in Java, we don't have to increment I at the end of the loop because that's done in the third statement at the top. And then after the for loop, I need to add a print statement. So we'll do a system.out.println, and I want to print the total. And then close my scanner object. So in the name of the object, dot close empty parentheses. And here again, I want to look up how to format 3 decimal places in Java. So I learned something new here. Alright, so on Stack Overflow, I found an easy way to do this with the formatter. And formatter would be just like the scanner class. It's a Java class that you can use. So by using the that drop down thing that pops up when you're typing something that's built in, if you click on that, then it will automatically like import it at the top. Otherwise, if you just type it out all the way, then you have to go add it yourself. So I'm going to call it DEC for decimal. So that's a nice quick little reference name for my new object. And then I can just print it directly, print the formatting directly into the line where I'm printing. So what I want to print is total. And before that, I'm going to use DEC for the object dot format. And then all of that is going to go inside parentheses. And the first item is going to be %sign dot 3f, similar to how we did before, where f, lowercase f, means that's like the signal for formatting fractions, or in this case a decimal, something less than 1. And I want it with 3 decimals, so it's 0.3 after the %sign. So this one is good to go. Copy and paste it into Kattis, submit, and that's it. So this was the quality adjusted life year problem. So next time it looks like I'll be doing night packing problem. See you in my next one.